Right, I'm back on the old school pianos, except this time no Prodigy. And I'm not going to ID each piano as I go through, so I'll be interested to see who's the first person to successfully ID all the pianos. They're all classics anyway, so it should be easy. This piano line's interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, that opening chord is really dissonant. By dissonant, I mean it has this element to it that sounds kind of wrong, it clashes. It's this pair of adjacent notes here. Well, it works when you put the rest of the chord in anyway. But that tiny bit of discomfort is a really powerful tool when used as well as it is by the guys who put this track together. So it opens with a tension. And naturally we feel like we want to move to something a little bit less tense. The following chord still has a little bit of dissonance in it, but nowhere near as much. This chord also includes two notes that are very close together, though slightly less dissonant than the adjacent notes in the previous chord. Yeah, that's a little bit uncomfortable, isn't it? But when you put it all together, it just gives that little bit of pain, a tiny bit of pain in with the pleasure. Which makes it all the more deep, all the more complex, all the more rich. It's also worth noting that the overall pitch of the sequence is descending, so it feels like you're moving downwards. But as you're moving downwards, as we move from the first chord to the second chord, the dissonance goes from pretty extreme to strong but not as extreme. So in effect, the dissonance is giving way as we descend further and further down the key range. So that third chord also has an element of dissonance, but again, it's less dissonant than the previous two chords. And the final chord in the sequence is by far the lowest chord, and is quite dissonant, but in a way that leads nicely back into the first chord. Now this use of dissonance to create tension and release is a very common trait among classic riffs. There's something quirky about all the pianos I'm going to show you. They each have moments of dissonance that help contrast against the beautiful harmonies that they also contain. The result is a much deeper, a much more compelling and unusual cocktail of emotion. And while not every track that has that complexity is a hit, and while not every hit has that complexity, there is a very strong correlation. And interestingly enough, every track achieves it in a slightly different way. Now this one's a massive club classic. It's been sampled loads of times, which is part of the reason why I think it's more fun not to ID the original tracks where the pianos are from. Now the first quirky thing about this particular piano line is its rhythm. The music is based on 4 beats per bar, right? So you get a count of 1, 2, 3, 4. And what this riff does is it deliberately avoids landing on beats 1 and 3. This actually helps put a focus on beats 1 and 3 of the drum rhythm, and it makes the piano feel more funky and offbeat. The chord sequence is quite fun as well. The first chord is a simple major, and then we move up and to a minor chord. Often going from major to minor is like going from happy to sad, but in this case, because we've moved up in pitch, there's a bit of an emotional lift. So what is it? Is that a sad movement or is this a happy movement? Well, it's both. Emotionally, we're being pulled in 2 different directions at the same time. Now, generally, mixing happy feelings and sad feelings in music is extremely powerful. It's very reflective of the emotions that we feel in real life, particularly concerning things that we really care about. So if you've ever felt a bit happy and a bit sad whilst listening to old school music, that's not just nostalgia, that's emotion that's encoded into the music. Now the third chord is designed to lead into the fourth chord. And what's interesting about both of these chords is that they can be considered suspended chords, which basically means they put you on edge. They create a suspense. Basically, it's another form of tension. And the relief from that tension comes in the form of another minor chord that's much lower in the sequence. So we've been lifted up, and then we've been taken down with a bit of suspense, and now we're even lower with some minor chord sadness. But that sadness, pitch-wise, is just below where we started, so it loops nicely. Quick production tip for you, by the way. There's a great little free plugin called Stereo Touch from Voxengo. What this does is it creates a delayed copy of the mono signal, and it makes that delayed signal completely stereo. All we need to do is find a delay time and a volume level for that delay that fits into the mix nicely. Now I normally like to listen to just the left channel, just the right channel, the mono sum and the stereo difference whenever I'm trying out a stereo effect. Well, the left and the right channel are a little bit echoey, but I think that sounds okay. The mono sum and the stereo difference sound perfect, so I'm happy. Check out this next piano line. It proves that you don't necessarily need an interesting rhythm to produce an interesting and memorable piano riff. And if you know this track, I'm willing to bet that you recognised it within the first chord or two. And that's because the first chord has a particular kind of tension to it, the second chord has another particular kind of tension to it, and notice that the low notes between the first and second chords is an upwards motion, whereas the high notes between the first and second chords move down. So again we've got that bittersweet, happy, sad, melancholic kind of feeling. It's very distinct, it's very emotionally potent, and quite frankly I think the majority of modern day producers could learn a hell of a lot by studying the old school classics. By the way, look at the pitch arc of this riff. Just like the previous riff we studied, the pitch starts somewhere, goes somewhere, and then leads back to where it began. This is part of what can make a loop addictive. And the next classic piano does exactly the same thing, but again in a different way. What can I say about this? A perfect example of pleasure and pain. We're in the major key, but there's so much tension thrown into the progression that it's almost like an anxious happy, perhaps like falling in love or something. I'm not going to say a lot about this one because I don't want to be repeating myself too much, but pay special attention to the quirky bit in bar 2. That's where the real magic is. It gives it a bit of tension and it makes it much more memorable than it would have been if it had just had one of those standard house piano rhythms. Now this is a real nice piano, a real sweet piano that's got a lot going for it, but the reason why I'm bringing this particular one to your attention is because in the original track that it's from, it switches pianos, and both of them are great riffs with loads of tension, and the contrast between the two different flavours is just a beautiful moment when they switch. I've just thought of another great piano riff that switches, but I'll come back to that after the next one. This one's interesting for a lot of the same reasons as the other pianos here. It starts with tension, it relieves, it moves from one pitch area away and then back towards the starting pitch again. The chords move down and then back up, whereas the low notes move up and then back down, which helps to produce that slightly tainted, happy feeling. But what I find really striking about this piano riff, listen to how the rhythm of it follows the drum beat so closely. Okay, I'm not even going to talk over this last one, but remember I said it has a nice switch.